Howdy, my name is Jordan Meredith. I am class of 2020 and I'm a biomedical science major.
Howdy, I'm Madeline Bradford. I am class of 2022 and I am also a biomedical science major.
Howdy, I'm Courtney Berkovich. I'm class 2022 and I am also a biomedical science major.
Howdy, my name is Crystal Wen. I am class 2022 and I am also in biomedical science major.
Howdy, my name is Zoha Hassan. I am class of 2022 and I am also a biomedical science.
And together we are group 3 and today we will be discussing the Colorado tick fever. So as an introduction, as I just stated, we'll be discussing the Colorado tick fever, which is vectored by the tick species Dermacentor andersoni. This tick is also commonly referred to as the wood tick. And coincidentally enough, this tick is commonly resides in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado and is prevalent during certain times of the year.
Okay, so as Jordan said, we are focusing today on the Dermacentor andersoni tick, which is also commonly called the Rocky Mountain wood tick. This is the life cycle of this tick. It follows the typical life cycle of a hard tick. It starts out as an egg and then proceeds to a larval nymph and an adult stage. Once the eggs hatch, the larva is going to be the smallest form of the tick, and then it takes a single blood meal, passes on to the nymphal stage, takes a single blood meal, and passes on to either the adult male or adult female stage. The larval stage can survive up to a month without a blood meal before it has to take a blood meal in order to pass on to the nymphal stage. The nymphal stage can survive upwards of 1 year without a blood meal before it needs one to pass on to the adult male or adult female stage. Each of these two stages can survive up to 2 years without a blood meal before it'll need one in order to reproduce or complete its life cycle. This leads, all these times add up to lead to a typical lifespan of this tick from anywhere to 1 to 3 years. It really just depends on how early or how late it decides to take its blood meal in the certain life stage that it is in. All right, so for environment, Jordan said on the previous slide that this tick is most commonly found in Colorado. It is also found in other Rocky Mountain states, which are going to just kind of follow diagonally from the red state right there, which is Colorado. It's commonly found in grasslands, brushy areas, forests, and other sort of environments and ecosystems that you'll find around a mountain range. They are found in these grassy and brushy areas because they prefer to quest on the ends of those of the short grass and like the ankle length grass. All right, so for feeding habits, this tick is what we call a sanguivore, which means that it is a blood feeder. It does take a blood meal in order to survive and it continue and further its life cycle, like I said previously. Each tick is going to feed, each life stage of the tick, I should say, is going to feed on mammals relative mostly to its size. The larval stage is going to be the tick that feeds on the smaller mammals such as field mice, chipmunks, squirrels, maybe anything else that you're going to find that's going to be smaller in size in those grasslands and in the forest. The nymphal stage is going to feed on primarily medium-sized mammals, but it's going to be a mixture of both the small and medium-sized mammals. These are going to be things such as foxes, raccoons, anything of that size group that you might find, again, in the wooded areas or in those grasslands. And then the adult male and adult female stages are again going to size up. They don't feed exclusively on larger mammals, but they do primarily feed on larger animals. And that's going to be your deer, any like mountain lions or big cats that you might find in the forest. And then also this is the life stage that is going to feed primarily on humans. All right, so as far as environment and habitat preference goes, we have previously stated they like the grassy areas such as that you can see all the way to the left. All these red states right there are the states that they have been found in, but it is most commonly found in Colorado. And then they are commonly found in wooded areas as well. As far as habitat preference goes, this tick does prefer warm spring days. They are most active during those days, but they are commonly found anywhere from February to November. As far as the mountains themselves go, the ticks prefer higher temperatures at lower elevations, but they have adapted to thrive in lower temperatures at higher elevations. So again, they like it to be warmer if they're at the bottom of the mountain, but they can also survive if it's colder up at the top of the mountain.
The pathogen of this disease is the Colorado tick fever virus. It is in the genus Cultivirus, which belongs to the family Reoviridae. There are many different viruses that come from this family due to its large amount of genome segments in the RNA. This allows for different strains of the virus and many different species that can be infectious. The virus attacks erythrocytes and bone marrow cells, which can lead to infection in all sorts of tissue in the body, including the spleen and the CNS. The incubation period is like 3 to 4 weeks, and it takes anywhere from days to weeks longer for more serious symptoms to become apparent. The vector requires the pathogen through blood meals of infected reservoir hosts, more commonly when larvae feast on small infected mammals, such as the squirrel shown in the infographic. The pathogen is multiplying inside the vectors, but the ticks don't actually get sick or feel the symptoms of the disease, and this makes all stages available to pass on the disease to further hosts. Once infected, the tick is infected for life. It gets passed transstadially through each stage of the vector. The pathogen is multiplying. Just kidding. And then for the vector to be infected, the pathogen must pass through the midgut infection barrier, the midgut release barrier, the midgut escape barrier, and also the salivary glands infection and release barriers. Once it gets through the salivary glands, it is then ready to infect further hosts through biting. As we see in the infographic, each stage has its own host where you have the larvae that attack the small rodents, and that's where they get the disease. And then the disease is passed through each different stage, and each stage has their own like bigger vectors that they can infect further on. The vector, as I said, Dermacentor andersoni, transmit the pathogen through their saliva when they blood feed on humans. When they feed on larger animals, those animals can also get infected with Colorado tick fever, but it do not play a role in giving the tick the disease. In order for the pathogen to be transmitted to the host, the pathogen must be able to infect the erythrocyte and soon infect the blood cells before they're attacked by the white blood cells. And I've included a picture of what the Colorado tick fever virus looks like among the erythrocytes, which is in the blue circle.
So when it comes to the Colorado tick fever virus specifically, symptoms become apparent after 5 days after infection. The symptoms of CTF are often flu-like, and people that are infected may experience headaches, nausea, muscle pains, specifically in the lower back and leg region. Patients also experience a biphasic fever that comes in 2 different waves. The first fever may be severe for a day and then subside for 2 days until the second fever shows for another day or so. In the most serious cases of CTF, patients might show severe illnesses related to the central nervous system, and this is due to inflammation of the membrane around the brain. And in addition to this severe case, patients also might experience an enlargement of the spleen. So unfortunately, a vaccine has not been created, and therefore patients are forced to use over-the-counter medications such as Tylenol because it contains acetaminophen, and they use this in order to just alleviate some of the symptoms that they're experiencing, such as the headaches and muscle pains. But there isn't a vaccine yet, so curing this disease isn't happening right now. This infection is often confused with other illnesses. As I said, the symptoms are flu-like. So it may be going underreported, but studies show that only 59 human cases were reported from 2010 to 2019. And since animals are considered carriers of CTF, they actually can't get sick from the bite. And because of this, it's actually difficult to tell just how many animals are infected. Also because of how vast the Colorado Rocky Mountains are.
Okay, and here is the transmission cycle of the Colorado tick fever. As Jordan mentioned before, it is vectored by the Dermacentor andersoni, as we can see at the right of the infographic. The transmission cycle is a little bit complicated because every stage of the tick makes some contributions to the pathogen transmission. And we have 3 susceptible hosts. In total, they are small rodents, large mammals, and humans. The small rodents are the host for the nymphs. The large mammals and humans are the host for the adults. They all live in the Colorado mountain region that has cold winters and warm summers. The nymphs take their blood meal on small rodents, and the small rodents become infected with Colorado tick fever virus through the tick bites. And this is how the pathogen gains entry into the host. The small rodents are the reservoir host. The virus replicates readily inside the host, and the host do not develop any clinical symptoms of the virus. So whenever an uninfected tick comes to feed on an infected rodent, the virus can exit the host when the blood meal is taken. The larva can be infected by the virus when they take blood meal from the small rodents. The infected larva will develop into infected nymphs, and the infected nymphs will eventually infect other small rodents when they feed on them. And therefore, we have a double arrow between the nymphs and the small rodents, meaning that both of them can infect each other. And we have 1 arrow pointing from the small rodents to the larva, which means the small rodents can infect the larva. And after the nymphs develop into the adults do not fly or jump to find a host. Instead, they quest. While questing, the adult ticks hang out on the tip of the leaves or grass, their front legs poised in order to catch and grab any host passing by. The hosts are mainly large mammals and humans. And you may notice in the infographic, we put active people in a larger scale than a normal people. This is because active people are more likely to get in contact with ticks when they are exercising or working outdoors, compared to people who are just sitting in front of their computers all the day, just like me.
And finally, I will be talking about ways to prevent getting infected with CTF. As Madeline mentioned above, Dermacentor andersoni usually transmits Colorado tick fever in areas with mountains and grasslands, areas such as the Rocky Mountains. Because of the location, a lot of the people who are infected are usually those who enjoy spending time outdoors. Humans who enjoy hiking in areas like this need to take certain precautions before going on a hike outdoors. So measures that can be taken include covering any exposed skin, specifically in the leg area. To do this, wearing long pants, high socks, high boots are all good ways of covering up. Another measure that can be taken is by putting on repellent before going outdoors, because the repellent, wait for it, will repel ticks. And when you're outdoors, absolutely avoid any contact with small mammals. Do not try to touch them, and definitely do not get bitten by them. And finally, avoid low foliage, because this is where ticks like to quest. Other preventive measures that can be taken include doing a tick check when coming back indoors. As you can see from this animation, the lady is literally bending over backwards to look for ticks, which emphasizes that you should look all over your body because ticks are small and can be hiding anywhere. Same goes for your pets. When you come indoors, do a full body check on them to ensure that there are no tick bites or ticks still attached to your pet. And finally, spraying yards with pesticides such as DEET are a good way of making sure that your yard is not infested with ticks. And now I will be going over 2 suggestions on how to disrupt the transmission cycle of Colorado tick fever. And since most adult ticks quest on low foliage, it would be best to avoid these areas when you're going outdoors. And by sticking on designated trail areas, humans will decrease their chances of getting bit by Dermacentor andersoni. This will mainly target the adult stage, as Crystal mentioned above. This is a stage that bites the humans. Nymphs as well, because nymphs will not be affected here because they bite the small mammals, and small mammals are necessarily not restricted to the trails. This method can be employed by posting signs at the starts of trails and throughout trails, clearly telling hikers not to stray from the designated areas they're supposed to be walking on. The pros of this method will be that the risk of getting infected with Colorado tick fever from Dermacentor andersoni will greatly decrease. And a con may be that people may complain that going into the wilderness and exploring nature aside from designated trail areas is what they enjoy. And by being restricted to walking a certain way or certain place, they do not get to truly enjoy the wilderness. A second method, which can be used to disrupt the transmission cycle of Colorado tick fever, is by creating a tick-free zone in the yards of homes, specifically in homes in the Western United States. Ways to do this include mowing the lawn frequently, as this will decrease foliage for the ticks to quest on, fencing the yard to prevent unwelcome animals such as deer and raccoons from entering the yard, and removing any old furniture or items which may be laying around in the yard and providing ticks with a good hiding place. These measures will once again target the adult stage, but this might also target the nymphal stage because small mammals that enter the yard, if they're in fact, they get bitten by the tick in the yard, that by removing any old furniture, those ticks will no longer be there. And by fencing in the yard, the small mammals will not be able to enter the yard, which creates a disconnect between the nymphs and the small mammals. To employ this method, city councils can educate their citizens on how to keep a clean yard and the advantages of keeping a clean yard. And committees can be formed, which do routine checks maybe every month or so to ensure that yards don't have places for ticks to reside in. The pros of these measures can be that ticks will no longer be a problem in yards, keeping kids and adults safe from tick bites. And a con can possibly be that it may be too expensive to keep a yard well maintained.
This is our references page, and this concludes our presentation over the Colorado tick fever and the vector Dermacentor andersoni.